The Sweet Smoke of Summer, a story of barbecue, bigotry, and redemption. The sweet, smoky aroma of hickory and mesquite swirled gently on the light summer breeze, dancing like a familiar tune that brings back memories of home. It was a warm Saturday afternoon, and I had been tending my smoker for the past 3 hours, meticulously crafting what I was certain would be my best rack of ribs yet. They were close, achingly close, to perfection. The kind of fall-off-the-bone tender that makes you question your life choices up to that point, wondering why you hadn't spent more time mastering the craft of barbecue sooner. I'd invited a few friends over. Nothing fancy, just a casual afternoon get-together with good food, good music, and good people. The playlist was mellow. Marvin Gaye's smooth voice crooned softly through my outdoor speakers, mingling perfectly with the rhythm of laughter and conversation. I leaned back for a moment, taking it all in, feeling genuinely content. That's when I heard the screeching. "Excuse me. Excuse me, sir." The voice was sharp, brittle, and full of authority she hadn't earned. I turned away from my smoker slowly, wiping my hands on a towel tucked in my waistband. Standing at the edge of my property was a woman whose expression could curdle milk. Her lips were pressed into a tight line. Her face flushed an unnatural shade of pink, and her arms were crossed over her chest in a way that looked downright painful. Her blonde hair was stiff, styled into an aggressively peppy bob, and a pair of oversized sunglasses perched on her nose, threatening to fall off at any second. Beside her stood a boy, 8 or 9 years old, maybe. He wore a superhero mask, one of those cheap ones you find in a party store, and seemed far more interested in the loose pebble he was kicking back and forth at his feet than in his mother's growing agitation. "Yes?" I asked, keeping my tone even, though I already knew this wasn't going to be a pleasant conversation. "Your barbecue," she said, practically spitting the word out like it offended her tongue. "The smell is pervasive. It's wafting through the entire neighborhood. It's overpowering." I raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. She gestured toward the boy, who hadn't stopped kicking his pebble. "My son is very sensitive to smells. He has a headache now because of all this smoke." I glanced at the boy. He didn't look distressed in the slightest. If anything, he looked bored. "I'm sorry you feel that way," I replied carefully. "I'm just having a small barbecue with some friends. I'll do my best to keep the smoke down." "Keep the smoke down?" she repeated, her voice rising in pitch until it grated. "This isn't some rundown shack in the middle of nowhere. We have standards in this neighborhood." She took a step forward, her gaze drilling into me. "And frankly, the smell is ethnic. It's too strong. Too much." There it was. The word hung in the air between us, like a sour note ruining a beautiful song. My blood simmered, not unlike the barbecue sauce bubbling gently in my pot. "Ethnic," I repeated, lifting an eyebrow. "Yes," she said with an emphatic nod. "You people should go back to where you came from. This isn't that kind of neighborhood." For a moment, I just stood there, stunned. Her words dripped casual racism like cheap sauce slipping off a greasy spoon. My friends, who had been chatting nearby, had gone quiet. I saw them drifting closer, their faces a mixture of disbelief and quiet fury. "Excuse me, ma'am," said my friend David, stepping forward. He was calm, but firm. "That's completely uncalled for. He's not bothering anyone." But she wasn't listening to him. Her eyes were fixed on me like laser sights on a target. "I'm calling the police," she announced, already reaching into her oversized bag for her phone. "This is a disturbance of the peace. And frankly, I'm pretty sure that thing," she pointed a trembling finger at my smoker, "is some sort of health violation." As she dialed, spewing exaggerated complaints about noxious fumes and toxic smoke, something inside me snapped. I was done being polite, done pretending her racism was anything less than what it was. I reached for my own phone, an idea sparking to life. "Go ahead," I said calmly. "Call them. You're standing on my property. I feel threatened. I'll be calling them too." Her face twisted into an expression that said, "You're too stupid to understand what's happening," as she turned away and started talking to the 911 operator. I tapped in the same number she had. As it rang, I moved to my laptop, resting quietly on the picnic table. I'm a web developer by trade. Finding information online is my superpower. And something told me I was about to put it to good use. The digital battlefield. While she fabricated her story to the dispatcher, I opened a public records database. Her car was parked half on my grass, half on the street. The license plate was right there. In seconds, I had her name. Let's call her Barbara Jensen. It fit. From there, it was easy. A social media search turned up her Facebook page. A perfectly curated shrine to suburban superiority. Filtered selfies, motivational quotes in curly fonts, and thinly veiled complaints about how the neighborhood had changed over the years. But beneath the picture-perfect posts were cracks. Former employees of the boutique she owned hinted at unpaid wages. One mentioned a lawsuit buried deep in the comments. I dug deeper. It didn't take long to find gold. There was an album from a theme party a few years back. The theme was, let's say, culturally inappropriate. There she was front and center, grinning like the cat that ate the canary, wearing a costume that could only be described as offensively caricatured. Her friends were no better, but she was unmistakably the ringleader. I took screenshots. Lots of them. Meanwhile, her voice droned on. He's being aggressive. I fear for my safety, my son's safety. I glanced at the boy again. He wasn't even paying attention. He'd finally stopped kicking the pebble and was now watching me, his eyes wide with curiosity and maybe a little fear. I felt a pang of sympathy. He was a pawn in his mother's twisted game, and he didn't even know it. Then I heard the sirens. Enter the law. Barbara's smug expression returned as a cruiser pulled up. Two officers stepped out, a young woman and an older man who looked like he'd seen it all before. Officer, Barbara called, pointing at me as though she were identifying a dangerous criminal. That man is creating a public nuisance. The smell is unbearable. He's being hostile. The younger officer turned to me. Sir, we received a complaint. Can you tell us what's going on? I took a breath, steadying myself. Officers, I'm having a barbecue with friends. This woman, I nodded toward Barbara, has made several racist remarks. She told me to go back to where I came from. The older officer's brows rose. Is that true, ma'am? Barbara sputtered. He's lying. He's just trying to distract you from his violation of health codes. I held up my phone. Actually, I have a recording of what she said. The female officer nodded. If you can play it, that would help. As I queued up the audio, I caught the boy, Barbara's son, peering at me from behind his mother. His mask was pushed up on his head, and he looked scared. Before I play this, I added, there's something else. I turned my laptop around and showed them the screenshots. Their expressions shifted as they scrolled through the photos. Barbara's face drained of color. What is that? She stammered, reaching for the laptop. Evidence, I said simply, of behavior that shows she may not be the most credible witness. The older officer pulled out his notepad. Ma'am, we'll need to ask you some questions about these images. Barbara was unraveling fast. Her hand shook. This is harassment. I looked at her son, who was tugging at her sleeve. Mommy, what's going on? He whispered. That's when I dropped the final bomb. Maybe you should ask your mom about the insurance fraud she committed in 2018, I said quietly, when she scammed her insurance for plastic surgery. Barbara's knees buckled slightly. He's lying, she cried. But it was over. The officers exchanged a glance. Ma'am, the male officer said, his voice sharp now. We'll need you to come with us. Aftermath. Barbara Jensen's perfect world crumbled right there on my lawn. As they escorted her to the cruiser, she shot me a look of pure hatred. But I wasn't afraid. Her son stood on the sidewalk, watching her go. His face was pale. I walked over and crouched beside him. Hey, I said gently. You okay? He shook his head. I don't know what's happening. I sighed. I don't either. But I hope your mom learns from this. I hesitated, then asked, You hungry? He glanced at me. You're still having a barbecue? I smiled. Yeah. You want a hot dog? He nodded slowly. A new beginning. His name was Tyler. And as it turned out, Tyler loved barbecue. Despite his mother's claims about his sensitivity, he wolfed down 2 hot dogs and a plate of potato salad while laughing with my friends. They played frisbee, showed him how to toss a football, and made sure he felt welcome. As the sun set, a social worker arrived. Tyler was going into temporary custody, but he seemed relieved. Before he left, he hugged me. "Thanks for being nice," he whispered. The story spreads. The next day, the story went viral. Barbara Jensen's racist tirade and arrest were all over the news. Her Facebook was a wasteland of angry comments. Her business tanked. She moved out of state. Last I heard, she was living with her sister, trying to rebuild her life. But Tyler? He thrived. He went to live with his aunt, a kind woman who loved him. He did well in school, made friends, and started pursuing art. A year later, he even started dating a black girl in high school, something that seemed profoundly symbolic. Our friendship grew. I became a mentor. We went to games, museums, and, of course, more barbecues. He was the first to help me with the smoker every time. The lesson that day taught me the power of standing up for what's right, of meeting hate with truth and prejudice with kindness. And today, as the sweet smoke of hickory and mesquite fills my yard once again, it carries a different meaning. It's not just about food. It's about family, about hope. And I'm proud to say I'm now engaged to an incredible woman from Ghana. Tyler respects her deeply and calls her family. As he flips burgers beside me on a warm summer afternoon, I'm reminded that even in the darkest moments, there's always hope for a brighter future.